Phones off. Good evening, everyone. Good evening, everyone online. Welcome to Rudolph Steiner Branch, Chicago. This is our fifth evening of hearing Richard Steele of the Carl Koenig Institute speaking to us as they share this incredible exhibit of Carl Koenig's drawings of the Calendar of the Soul. So this is the last evening that we are going to be hosting Richard and Deborah Grace and our exhibit, which has been an incredible experience for all of us here in Chicago. So welcome to everyone online, welcome to everyone here in person, and I'm going to turn it over to Deborah Grace to introduce Richard.
Thank you, Mary. This is such a wonderful community, and I have to say you are blessed to have Mary at the helm of things here.
Yay.
It's been a privilege to begin the exhibitions through North America here in Chicago, in the Heartlands. I think it was you pointed out, Debbie. It feels right, and as you could tell from the quotes I read last night from Carl Koenig, he had a deep connection to America and the tasks here. So before I begin to introduce Richard, I just want to say, because a couple of people have asked me to explain what is meant with Richard's talk series on the Calendar of the Soul. So Richard gave a series of 2 introductory talks, which are about an hour long. It was online, and then every week of the year for 52 weeks, he talked not only about one of the verses of Rudolf Steiner and the drawing of Carl Koenig and the cross for that week, and of course 4 times from different perspectives, but also out of his own going through these I call them doorways that Carl Koenig created into these inner landscape of the Calendar of the Soul. Those talks are available online, and many people who participated, I said on the first evening there were about 500 people in different languages, are going through them now a second time, because for me, and okay, I met the Calendar of the Soul 50 years ago, it's been like the beginning of a new, I don't know even what to say, and I'll just say a new phase of the journey, not very poetic, but so if anyone is interested in participating in the talk series, please send an email to office@carlkoeniginstitute.org. I also would like to say, and I forgot to welcome all of you who are here online. I'm so sorry. Welcome. We're so happy you're here and part of this wonderful expanded Chicago community. Richard and I are getting, those little taps on the shoulder from the social media people at the Institute in Berlin saying, how about some feedback from people who are participating in the first exhibition? So if any of you would like to write any reflection about how this has been for you, the exhibition, Richard's talks, whatever, please also just drop a few lines to office@carlkoeniginstitute.org, and we will be grateful for whatever you have to say. Thank you. So in introducing Richard for this last talk, which is titled Michaelmas, the Calendar of the Soul, Soul Breathing and World Breathing in our Inner Task for the Climate. The first time I heard Richard talk about this, I said, what possible relationship can there be between our work with the Calendar of the Soul and healing the breathing of the earth? Well, I don't carry that question as a question anymore, because so much has come through what he has shared. So I very much look forward to hearing these insights from Richard again, and we hope that you all really enjoy and appreciate what he will share. So welcome, Richard Steele. Thank you.
Thank you for making it difficult for me to start. So, we only have 3 themes this evening, right? That's already a progression from yesterday's 5 themes. So, but the question you put, what has the work of the calendar of the soul to do with the climate? I think we've already answered that anyway, because we've already looked at the rhythms in connection to world rhythms. So I'd just like to pick up on that. We looked yesterday to the foundation stone and realized that in the center, the middle part of these 3 verses, the 3 practicing verses, we have the human soul living in the rhythmical system of the human being, and therefore connecting the human being truly to the spirit and to the earth. So that's where I'd like to start today, with the foundation stone. Human soul, you live within the beat of heart and lung, which through the rhythms of time leads you into your own soul being's feeling. Practice spirit sensing in balance of the soul, where the surging world evolving deeds unite one's own eye with the eye of the world, and you will truly feel. So we've spoken about this a number of times already, and I'd just like to point to the fact that what Karl Koenig is pointing to with these pictures, with his work on the 13 crosses, is to show how, with practicing the calendar of the soul, we can also pick up these cosmic rhythms, which Rudolf Steiner in some way managed to, let's say, magic into the verses. And they're not so easy to find if you don't know they're there, but after a while, you begin to hear in the words of the verses how there are connections from here to there, and it becomes a mystery of architecture where these connections really are and what do they mean. So Karl Koenig was the first to adventure into this architecture of the calendar of the soul as a complete, holistic work of art. And we can go that path if we look for these connections. And I was saying just now, it means if you look to these 4 verses, you are looking to the 4 directions of flow within the year, as if we're in this wonderful lemniscate of time. And any Eurythmist will tell you it's not just 2 circles. A lemniscate is something completely different, because we have a movement from inside to outside, from outside to inside, and then the inner part of the year, the winter part of the year, we're going inside again and outside again, from inside outside, from outside outside. So we have 4 directions, 4 flows, like the flow of the heart. So in actual fact, with every step we make through the year, if we are connecting to these 4 flowing directions every week, we are doing exactly this, that we are practicing the heart and lung rhythm. 1 step and 4 beats of the heart. We're practicing quite practically this breathing of the year, this breathing rhythm with the beat of the heart. So it's not just going like as if time was something spatial, like we have a calendar on the wall and we cross off each day when we finished it, at last we've got this day finished, this day finished. then some day arises, like maybe Michaelmas or so, oh, next week is Michaelmas. No, we go through the year in a different way, so we connect every week with the whole of the year. And in that way, all the festivals speak to us every day, not just when they arise. So it is not in the usual way a spatial experience of one week to the next, but indeed adventuring into this being of rhythm. So Michaelmas, that is the festival we're just coming towards now, or what can I actually say, we're in the festival of Michaelmas already, because it's quite clear that there are 12 verses for each festival, each of these 4 big festivals. And so Michaelmas also has a preparation time and a time of ripening of the festival, so that Michaelmas, so we can see the Michaelmas picture, is in the center of 12 pictures, 12 verses, which all belong to Michaelmas, all show a particular aspect of the Michaelmas festival. And if we notice that Michaelmas is actually the center of this pathway, we've begun with Easter and taken a pathway over St. John's, this height of the sun in summer, and now come to Michaelmas, then we are halfway on this journey. And we reflect then back to the beginning of the journey. We also look forward to the end of it. Of course, it's not an end. It's never an end, because time continues. It is a continuous flow. But the end of this series of verses, which already gives us the initiative for the next year, beginning with Easter. In actual fact, both verses are Easter. Holy Week and Easter week belong together, just as Michaelmas week and the week after Michaelmas belong very strongly together in the calendar of the soul. And the wording of these verses is completely unique. So we do cross a very particular threshold there. It's the crossing point of the Landesgate, Easter and Michaelmas. So if we look at this center of the path of the calendar of the soul, we hear again I like to call it a fanfare, some sort of you hear the trumpets and trombones playing with the first verse, I think. It's an amazing call to set us off on this journey at Easter. When from the world's wide realms the sun to human beholding speaks, and gladness rising from soul depths unites with light in seeing. Then out of selfhood sheaths, thoughts stream into the world afar and dimly bind the human being with spirit being. In the beginning of the journey, it's dimly. It can sound a bit strange, but that's what this path is about, that we awaken. And certainly Michaelmas is a very strong awakening moment where the will is really activated. So let me read these first lines of Holy Week also, because there again, it's such a joyous sound we hear. So, Easter, when from the world's wide realms the sun to human beholding speaks. And Holy Week, when from the depths of soul the spirit turns to the life of worlds. Completely opposite and next to each other. And so these are the 2 verses that belong together with Michaelmas. And I think it's a number of times that Rudolf Steiner spoke about this, that we should, when we celebrate Easter, already have a feel for Michaelmas. And the other way around, that Michaelmas include Easter. he didn't mention in the current of the soul, but it's quite obvious that this is where we find that completely embedded in this pathway. So let's read the verse again for this week that we've just been together. And that's verse 24. Let's hear this picture. Constant self-creation serves soul's self-perception. All these S's again. Right? Soul's self-perception. So we begin to wake up. This dimly, the dim thoughts that we can have at the beginning of the journey begin now to awaken. Steadily, the spirit strives in self-consciousness revitalized. That has to do with resurrection. Revitalized. Letting spring from soul's darknesses through self-assurance, fruit of will. That's not quite easy with translation, but for the original, it's quite clear. This verse, with all the S's, all this fire, is leading to this one event. And like when you're on stage, for instance, or you're telling a story to children or whatever, you have to have the last sentence, the last word in your mind already. So, don't start a story if you don't already have the end of it. That has to be alive in you. Also on stage, you don't just start somewhere and oh yeah, and that's the end now. No, you have to have the end in sight, because that is what you're going towards. And tell us about that, I'm sure. There are many exercises also on stage to practice this. Now, it's important to remember this when we read the verses, because every word is intentional by Rudolf Steiner. There's no question about that. So he finishes up with these words, fruit of will. And usually in English you would put this in the beginning of the sentence, but we've tried here to put it at the end. So we really do, just like the foundation stone finishes with the will. That good may become what we from our hearts are founding, what we from our heads direct out of will. It's, language has to lend itself to what Rudolf Steiner actually intended, I think. So just as we have with the foundation stone, the will at the end, so when we go into Michaelmas, we have this element of will, the fruit of will. So that is what we are at least hoping for or practicing, that through Michaelmas, out of our will forces, fruits can arise. And one of those fruits is certainly that thinking becomes real thinking. If we do not apply our will to thinking, then it just becomes the thoughts flowing through us, and we are directed. Yeah, like a reed in the wind, as it says in the Bible. But no, it is thinking is actually a will activity. And so we are asked to direct our will. So it says also in the foundation stone. But now for Michaelmas, that is the center. And we see in this verse, for this week, we are just ending now, this necessity to apply our will constantly to our own soul. Constant self-creation. That's what it's about. Not we do certain exercises and then we become better and better and better. Unfortunately, anthroposophy tells us that doesn't work like that. You don't sort of achieve something, you get a paper that tells you you are now initiate in the first grade or whatever. Unfortunately, sorry if there are initiates in this room I don't recognize, but usually it doesn't work like that. We have to start again and again from the beginning. And that's what the subsidiary exercises are all about. To notice that we have to start at the beginning, again and again, because in actual fact, it takes a whole lifetime to maybe not even achieve, but to practice this path. That is something which is not easy in anthroposophy. It doesn't make life easier, may even make it more difficult, because it is a constant self-creation of our own soul forces. Soul is not something which is finished at birth, but which gets created. And if we really apply our will, constantly self-created. So there we are, and if we look then at this crescendo of the 4 verses that belong together, 2 Michaelmas verses, the Easter verse here, and then we come to the 4th step. We come for the 4th time to this Easter cross, which is cross number 1. So at the end of this journey, we come back to picture 1. That's also quite special, but that's the case. The 4th time we arrive in this cross of Easter, and there we hear something very special. Verse, let's take verse 50 from our verse here this week. We come to verse 50, so that's 2 back from Holy Week. To the human eye, being speaks in mighty self-revelation, and freeing the forces of its own being, the lust for life of world existence. So, the creative forces themselves are speaking to us. And what do they say? Entering your being with my life being the creative forces. And your being, that is me, that is you, entering your being with my life, lifting its magic spell, I can reach my true goal. Now, I think that is already an amazing answer, that the constant self-creation of the human soul actually leads to the point where we are able to feel, at least, to realize to a certain extent, and realize means not just to understand, but to make it real, right? To a certain extent, to make real that the forces of creation need the human being, the striving human being today. So that is again an answer to this question: what does the kind of the soul have to do with the climate question, with the environment question? The creative forces that created this earth need the human being today. Every single human being with its inner striving, its constant self-creation is at the same time a portal for the creative forces of the universe. That is big, I believe. So that is in the cross of this week that we are just finishing now. What does that have to do with the climate? We realize that indeed the soul, and we see that in the picture of this week, the soul is this bridge between the spirit world and the earth, between the duality of day and night. The soul has this possibility, at least, to become a bridge again and again and again. And actually every day we practice, every morning we awaken, every evening when we go to sleep, we practice to a certain extent this bridging of the earthly world to the spirit world. And not only do we bring something with us from the spirit world every morning, but we take something of the earthly world to the hierarchies of the night. I think this is also an important thing to remember, to try and experience too. So we are connecting with our own soul, the rhythms of the earth, breathing process of the earth, with cosmic rhythms, with cosmic creative powers that also work in rhythms. In balance of the soul, where surging world-evolving deeds unite one's own eye with the eye of the world. These creative forces, that is what it's about. We can say the word, the logos, if we wish. In the beginning was the word. And with these creative forces of the word, we connect. But we also connect with the earth as a living being. And this is also something we need to, I think, sharpen our, let's say, our feeling capacities for. Not just our understanding, yeah, sure, understand, but also to feel that the earth is a living being, a being which is struggling to stay alive. That was a big theme for Karl Koenig, and very early on, when he began in curative education, he actually gave a talk about this in 1932. I think quite amazing. I spoke recently about 1933, that's when he started with the Canon of the Soul. Just 1 year before at Whitson, he gave a talk about the earth. And I'll read a couple of sentences from this. We would never be able to comprehend the earth in its wholeness if we could not experience the seasons that are part of it. The recurring seasonal changes to which the face of nature is subject are but the expression of the rhythmic beat of time in which the earth lives. The earth can only be a complete being in the span of 1 year, just as we human beings have head, breast, and limbs as members of our body, so the earth has her spring, summer, autumn, and winter. Just as we have our heads, limbs, heart, as we are threefold beings, so the year has these 4 seasons. And of course, we know that that's something which is not fixed down, which is not maybe for eternity. It's also not the same for everywhere on the earth. So we have a big task, I think, to take this up and to help realize the earth as a living, breathing being. And there is a very special description of a young man, a young American who had a near-death experience. And I don't know if you know the name, Daniel Berdyszewski. And he wrote a few things also, but I think the most important thing was, he said when he experienced himself dying and leaving the earth, he could look back on the earth and was so, he says, awestruck by the fact that the earth as a planet was breathing. It was contracting, expanding, as almost like a heart, he says. And therefore, his love towards this breathing planet became so great that he just had to return. And I think that's a wonderful description. And also maybe a little help to see how the earth can be seen from spirit realms, that we don't necessarily so easily see unless we have a near-death experience. Festivals, Michaelmas, St. John's, Easter, Whitsun, Christmas. We can add all sorts of festivals, of course. And Karl Koenig said it would be actually very nice to have a festival every week, because every week is a step on this path. Not just the big festivals we know about, but everyone, in China, when we started the talk series about the calendar of the soul in China, they said, well, let's find out about the traditional Chinese festivals, because there must be some sort of connection to other religions, other cultures. Yeah, that would be great. I mean, why don't you talk about that? And next conversation we have, you can tell me about it. I'd be really interested to hear about that. And the next time we have a conversation together, they say, well, we've looked into the traditional festivals in China, and we didn't know this, but there are actually 24 festivals. And of course, they relate in a very special way to the weeks of the year. So the festivals are moments where we can experience, or let's say bring to experience for each other also. The festival is not just something for myself, it's something of a social nature. We can help each other to experience this cosmic rhythm within the earthly rhythm, because the festivals are, so to speak, inaugurated out of the spirit. That is why we have Christian festivals, we have traditional Chinese festivals, we have Hindi festivals, and so on. They are, so to speak, endowed into the breathing of the year. So it is something which has come in the past out of the spirit into the breathing of the year itself. And so the festivals are a wonderful opportunity each time, maybe each week, to realize the connection of this breathing earth planet to cosmic rhythms, to cosmic realities. And as I say, it's not something which is there naturally. The festivals do not occur naturally, but they occur through social efforts, through the will of communities. And Carl Koenig goes on then to Whitsun, so of course he speaks about the Whitsun Festival, but I will read a little paragraph about this. If we now realize that we have practically lost sight of the way in which our life is bound up with the seasons, we shall see why it is that we can no longer recognize the power and the necessity of the great festivals of the year. Those, however, who live with children soon become aware that these seasonal festivals are necessities of life for the child. It is really an offense against the being of the child to deprive them of any real experience of these festivals, and thus to let them grow up as foolish as we ourselves are in this respect. If we no longer believe that these festivals are essential for our own being, we shall naturally find it impossible to accept the idea that they are also essential for the life of the earth and the great breathing process of the earth. We have learned to think biologically in the last decades, but we have altogether forgotten to take into account soul and spirit. I think to link on to yesterday evening, it is quite evident that Rudolf Steiner speaks the most about the festivals in the year 1923. It's exactly in this time between the burning of the Goetheanum, which we saw in the picture over here at St. John's, between the burning of the Goetheanum and the Foundation Stone, the Christmas Foundation Stone meeting conference. Between these two events, most lectures about the seasons are given. You know, the imaginations, of course, these wonderful cosmic images of the festivals that are given. And it shows also the process throughout the year. Many, many lectures. Also the last lecture that Rudolf Steiner gave in Berlin, it was the last time he could visit Germany because of political reasons. It was 1923. And in May, of 1923. What did he speak about? The Michaelmas festival. It's an amazing lecture. I think the most central lecture about Michaelmas is given in May, you know. It's quite unusual, but it was the last chance for him to speak in Berlin before he left the country altogether. And so he leaves this, just as in so many places where he speaks about the reality, particularly of the Michaelmas festival. He goes, of course, to Vienna, and going back to his own roots, so to speak, and in the center of Central Europe, gives this series of lectures about the Michaelmas festival, 1923. And then, of course, in Dornach, many, many lectures, including the Michaelmas festival. So we spoke about this yesterday, the significance of this time, 1923, in the life of Rudolf Steiner, and now we are 100 years into this rhythm also. It is a rhythm of time that we are living. We don't have just rhythms within a year, but rhythm of years. It's 3 times 33.3 years, which is the rhythm of the life of Christ. 3 times 33 and a third. 3 times. And that is the distance, so to speak. But that is a spatial expression, the distance from the Christmas Foundation meeting until this year. But let's not think of it as spatial. But if we think of it as a rhythm, then in actual fact we do come back. Just as we come back to this first cross in the calendar of the soul 4 times. So also in the rhythms of time, we do come back to this point where Rudolf Steiner could give something very specific to humankind. So we don't need to think it's so far away that it's a spatial experience. It is real and it is now. We are in this year 2023 and can experience maybe this urgency for Rudolf Steiner that the festivals are taken seriously also, taken into our inner striving and taken into social context, particularly as central festival, the Michaelmas festival. Now, if we look at the Michaelmas festival, we won't be long, and it's Michaelmas. So let's just hear the Michaelmas verse. In 2 weeks' time. There we are. O nature, your motherly being, I carry it in the being of my will. And my will's fiery might hardens to steel my spirit's drives, that they can birth a feel for self, to carry myself in me. The fire we talked about yesterday, not the same fire that burned the temple, see at St. John's, but an inner fire that Rudolf Steiner would wish to infuse in us, to enlighten in us, to kindle in our souls. That is the fire of Michaelmas. And I think it's incredible how fiery this verse actually is. We've had all these essays beforehand, and we'll have some more essays afterwards in the verses. But now in the center, in this Michaelmas verse, and Karl Koenig has shown that in the picture, we can feel ourselves in this, within the circumference of Mother Nature being the creative forces we just spoke about. We are the center, we are the yellow point, to speak of it in the sense of the meditation Rudolf Steiner gave for the curative educators. We are the yellow point in the blue of Mother Nature, the creative powers of the universe. And there we can experience, yes, this spark of will needs to be cultivated. My will's fiery might hardens to steel my spirit's drives. So that is being real with one's own karma in the end, to find how my spirit's drive, what are my spirit's drives, not my astral drives. That's what we usually talk about when we talk about drives, right? That's something that has to do with the soul. No, spirit drives. What are my spirit drives? And how can this birth of will at Michaelmas really strengthen, harden to steel my spirit's drives? That they can birth a feel for self. And of course, the embryologist Karl Koenig made an embryological drawing for Michaelmas. Because I'm saying to myself, something needs to come to birth. And so in this pathway from Whitson, which we looked at the first evening, this pathway from Whitson to actually spirit birth, which is the end of Christmas time, not Christmas itself, but the end of these 12 Christmas verses. The center is this embryological picture of Michaelmas. Again, the center between Whitson, which we can see as a conception, and the spirit birth, which takes place through the 12 verses of Christmas. And what happens if these spirit drives are hardened to steel? This fire actually can evolve. Then we reunite with these forces of creation, as we've already seen. The forces of creation can fulfill themselves through our soul. I think that's quite an amazing thing. But then we come to the fourth of these Michaelmas verses, Holy Week, verse 52. When from the depths of soul the spirit turns to the life of worlds. Is that not the etheric sphere? The life of worlds? And beauty wells from the widths of space. You see, two directions. Beauty in the widths of space and the life of worlds. Then, from farthest heavens, life force flows into human form, uniting by its mighty strength spirit essence with the human life. So, we can actually see how if we manage a little bit of this Michaelmas mood, this fire of will, then in actual fact, it can, I should say, attract life forces into the human soul, but we can also assume from this into the beauty of nature. This path through the current of the soul shows us how, in actual fact, we can be the vessel, the catalyzer, the bridge to bring life forces, new life forces into the world, into our own soul, but of course into the world. And we remember this middle part of the foundation stone, the rhythms, how we hear, human soul, you live within the beat of heart and lung, which through the rhythms of time leads you into your own soul being's feeling. Practice spirit sensing. In the balance of soul, in this middle part, we are actually in Michaelmas. Practice the balance of soul, where the surging world evolving deeds unite our own eye to the eye of the world. And that we saw yesterday, day before, last lecture and the lecture before, is the deed of Caspar Hauser, to leave, to open up, to keep open this connection that we can make to the spirit. So again, we find that Caspar Hauser has given something to humanity, that we may still make this connection that is intended at the end of this path of the earth, to unite one's own eye with the eye of worlds. And in doing so, we we help forces of life to enter this earth, this world. And you remember I told you these words that Rudolf Steiner spoke on January the 1st to the people who were gathered there, that they should create a special mood. This word that he uses, Stimmung, 3 times. Stimmung, Stimmung, Stimmung. The right mood, and we can also say the right atmosphere. Because, yes, atmosphere is, of course, the breathing space of the earth, where we also breathe physically. We breathe through the atmosphere of the earth. Atmosphere means breathing space of the earth, but it's also a social breathing space. When we talk about atmosphere in a meeting, for instance, it is a social breathing space. It is the question, how do we breathe with each other? How do we unite with each other? We're all here breathing the same air, you know? We are actually taking in the air of each other. You know, but that is a spiritual reality, that we are together and therefore sharing this atmosphere. It is a responsibility in social life, I think, to pay attention to the atmosphere, that the other can breathe in this social space. And we know, of course, how the words, "I can't breathe," became world famous. And I think that is something we all have to realize. The way the earth is at the moment, the way humanity is at the moment, we can't breathe. And the earth also not. And I do think that the breathing of the earth is the same as what we call climate. The climate has to do with this breathing process. The connection of heart and lungs, the breathing of the lungs and the beat of the spirit working into the world. That is the climate. But you know, now I would like to, it's Saturday evening, right? So Saturday evening is the beginning of Sunday, right? So we can start with the new verse. So I would like to put the cards out for the new verse. We're now progressing from the 3rd cross to the 2nd cross. You see, in that we take one step forwards with the cross, we go one step back. And so it is no longer the 3rd verse we take with us, but it is the 2nd verse. These wonderful wings of resurrection out of Easter time that can carry us towards the threshold. And similarly, the bottom picture is then verse 51. We're coming a step backwards from Easter, you see. So here we're going to step backwards, and there we're going to, there we're going to step forwards, there we're going to step backwards. It's difficult, but that's the way this works. It is a little dance every week. If we, just change our cards, change the 4 verses we take in this week, then we make a little dance. 2 of them go forwards and 2 of them go backwards. That's what rhythm is. It's a dance. There's this week, this coming week, and that is the week after Michaelmas, verse 28. So, there you see, we've gone one step forwards, one step backwards, one step forwards, one step backwards. So let's have a little dance. Right? And there we see this is, It's a dance of the heart that we go through the year with in this, if we look at the 4 verses. Now, this week, we have, let's say, an introduction to this Michaelmas festival in a special way. Of course, the 28th of September, the last address of Rudolf Steiner was in this week, whereas Michaelmas was the new week. That's also interesting to see. So there's something very special that happens. There's a special connection between these two. And if you see the little picture here, I don't know if you can see it so well, but there we have the meditant as an upright being, standing, let's say, opposite to the beings of nature, the tree, the animal. And so we hear also in the verse today, for this coming week, I can now belong to myself and shine out in a light. The light verse was 2 weeks ago. Now I can begin that this inner light can shine outwards. That's the will that can unite with the earth. And it shines out into the darkness of space and time. Space and time. Nature's beings tend towards sleep. Soul's depths should remain awake, and waking carries sun's fiery glow into the surge of winter's flow. It's an amazing verse, I think. It's always a very special for me because it is Karl Koenig's birthday also that week. And he very definitely saw his own task in this uprightness of the inner development, and then the rose cross that lights up above the meditant. Now, it's interesting to see that the word nature, although we're talking about the natural year, also the seasons, the festivals, nature as a word only comes twice in the calendar for soul. We're not taught about nature any other time, twice. And interestingly, it's this week, this coming week, and Michaelmas, the week after. 2 verses next to each other, where nature is spoken of, but completely differently. Let me read these 2 lines. For this coming week, nature's beings tend towards sleep. I, as a human being, am not a natural being only. Soul's depths should remain awake. And the next week, the Michaelmas week, oh nature, your motherly being, nature, your motherly being, not beings. That's the difference. So we make this huge step from the coming week to Michaelmas. Nature's beings, the animals, the trees, the minerals, everything that is there in nature, I need to see as also my responsibility through the fact that I am more than just nature. Then I take this step from nature's beings to the being of nature. And there we see this, I think, very beautiful picture, this blue around the yellow and with the stars in it. It's the creative forces of the cosmos. Something completely different from the little animals and trees that are in the coming week. It's a huge step between these 2 verses. Then we start with Michaelmas, with a completely new picture of what nature is. There was something which was incredibly important for Karl Koenig, by the way. You know the essays that he wrote about animals. And they were written for that purpose, that we get a new connection to the realms of nature. I'm sure he would have loved to write a book about plants also, and about minerals. He didn't get that far. the last weeks of his life, the last days of his life, he was working on these animal essays. And do take a look at the new volume, which is unfortunately titled Animals. The real title is actually Brother Animal, the title that also Francis of Assisi used, Brother Animal. So please get that book and change the title on the front, put a sticker on, Brother Animal. Never mind, the publishers wanted to call it Animals, and there you will find that Karl Koenig wants us so dearly to have a new connection to the realms of nature, to the animals that we share this world with, and to take a step at Michaelmas to these creative forces. And through the animals, of course, the human being could be created. We need to remember this, and you remember the Easter verse by Christian Morgenstern, the verse, the poem about the animals. It's quite special, the washing of the feet. You know that? Good, because I don't have it with me, and I can't speak it in English by heart. So, yes, then we see this connection again between Michaelmas and Easter, this thankfulness, this washing of the feet of the realms of nature. It's not just the animals in that point, but also the plants and the minerals. So, we're on this path now between finding this fire of my own will, that it becomes directed towards my spirit drives, whatever they are. But I hope we can feel that they have to do with the re-enlivening of the earth. It's not, it's not by accident that we're here now in this really urgent time for the healing of the earth. We are here for a reason, and I'm sure that particularly those who have any connection to anthroposophy must be able to feel in their inner spirit drives this necessity to turn in a new way to the earth, to the realms of nature, with the question, how can we help re-enlivening the earth and nature? So don't forget, we're heading towards the end of Michaelmas, and at the end of Michaelmas we have this cross of death. The seventh cross, we come to the third time after. It's the crossing point from Michaelmas to winter, to Christmas. And then we have this 33rd verse, and you can see it over there, the dead trees on the banks of the river. And then we hear, only now do I feel the world. Only now do I feel the world, which without the compassion of my soul would be mere frosty, empty life, revealing itself as void of power. And then comes the end lines of this verse. I think they're so important for the whole of this journey. We're crossing now from Michaelmas to winter. Without creating itself anew through souls, it, the world, could of itself find only death. That is the connection between the work on our own soul and the life forces of the earth, the climate, for instance. Without creating itself anew through souls, the world could of itself find only death. Now, I would like to take one more step, if you're with me. It's going to be very difficult because I would like to read you a couple of lines from Rudolf Steiner. But it's a very special book, and it's lovely. I saw you have, I think, 4 of these in your library. So you must have worked through them all together in the branch, which is wonderful. Spiritual science is a foundation of social forms. There we have the link to what I was saying yesterday. That was what Rudolf Steiner wanted of spiritual science, that it would be a foundation for social forms, not as personal enjoyment or enlightenment. It's the volume 199, and a volume which was very close to Carlo Pizza, and that's why he's written an introduction to this edition. Because he felt that was so important for our times, and he suggested this should be a compulsory reading for camping communities. Out of this, we should form communities. It's also a special book because, as far as I know, now you correct me, this is the only cycle of lectures where Rudolf Steiner speaks about Chicago 3 times. Doesn't say very much about it, but it's there, you know. Is there any other cycle of lectures where he speaks about Chicago 3 times? What does that mean, you know? No word of Rudolf Steiner's is just for fun or coincidence. So there it is, you know. He doesn't say anything very much specifically about Chicago. It's there 3 times. Beginning, middle, and end of this cycle of lectures. So probably that's why you have 4 copies in your library. It's a fascinating book. And one thing that comes in these lectures, in a number, it's 1920, right? In a number of places, Rudolf Steiner says to people, look at this building. And somehow that hit me to read this, you know. There he is, probably knowing that this building is not going to be there very long. Probably. I don't know, but probably that's the case. And he's telling these people, look at the forms of this building. He doesn't say why, but of course, because this architecture was meant to form the souls, to give impulses for social forms. That is quite clear. So if you're in these lectures, you know, look at where you are in this building. Now let me just read a line from the middle of this lecture cycle. The human being is embedded, as it were, in the whole cosmos. Owing to his senses, we belong to one particular spirit region of the cosmos. And through our limbs to another. You remember the lectures 1 year before for the teachers in Stuttgart, right? Thinking and willing. Only what lives approximately in the middle, the rhythmic being, the system of the lungs and the heart, and all that is connected with it, is actually of earthly origin. That's a new turn to what he's saying about this element of feeling. It is woven, as it were, out of a kind of world in the middle. It's a very special sort of introduction to what then comes about the connection of our threefold being to the earth and the social realms around us. I won't say too much about that, but let me read this line. You see, the world we live in between death and the new birth is a different world from the one existing here behind the sense tapestry. The world we enter between death and a new birth is another domain of the spiritual world. It is mainly the spiritual region where those beings dwell whom we refer to when speaking of the hierarchies. Angeloi, Archangeloi, and so on. Yet this world of the 9 hierarchies can only subsist when, through the physical human being. And it can only happen through the physical human being. It enters into a certain mutual intercourse with the world that I have described here as a spirit region beyond the domain of the senses. You see, our connection to the rhythms of the world is at the same time a connection to this realm of the hierarchies that we will realize after death. But obviously, Rudolf Steiner is telling that to people because we need to realize it now, before death, that this is the realm we will be entering, where the hierarchies are, and they are dependent on the human being as a physical being. And particularly, if I may add that in my own words, particularly the feeling realm of the human being, because that is of earthly origin. Our thinking is anyway cosmic, our willing is anyway cosmic, but how we cultivate our realm of feeling in the way it's meant in the kind of the soul verses, that is of utmost importance to the hierarchies. So he speaks then of the hierarchies and their workings in the world, how they create the world, but also he says, keep the world in balance. But how do they keep the world in balance? Where do they, the hierarchies, find their balance? The centripetal forces work principally through the human head. The centrifugal forces work primarily through the limb system. The middle system of the human being, the rhythmic system, is the one who is supposed to bring about balance, the consonance and harmony between the different cosmic forces. Consider what that means. It implies that when the human being develops a certain mood of soul, in German, Stimmung, an inner attitude, which, as we have seen from a variety of aspects, can only come about in the human being through spiritual science. This means, in other words, that the manner in which the human being breathes and his heart beats has significance not only for the human being, but for the whole cosmos. He's talking about social forms, you'd expect him to speak about, prices and, I don't know, economic life and things like this, and politics. He does, but he always leads in through these aspects. Where can we do something? And we can do something as human souls in this process. And then comes to something quite maybe surprising. One does not become spiritual by setting up theories concerning the human being or anything in the universe. One will only become spiritual if one understands how to connect humanity's earthly concerns, also social concerns, with the cosmos outside the earth. Again, we come to this question of Caspar Hauser. He was the one who left this possibility open for us. If Caspar Hauser had not lived and died the way he did, the connection between the human being and the cosmos would have been completely severed. Now Rudolf Steiner takes this up and shows us how we, as individuals, have responsibility for this process today. And I think that is so deep in today's situation of the world. How far have we got with cultivating our soul every day? Like this past week, we've heard constantly self-creating our soul. do we manage that? To constantly self-create. That is what it's about. And then in this volume, 3 times Chicago, he comes to speak about the climate. That's the only place that I know of that the climate is spoken about in this way. We have a certain kind of weather, wind, and so forth, seasons with this or that configuration. Now we experience externally in the atmosphere what once upon a time we set up as the order of social life in the social realm, the middle realm of social life. Here, the human being in his consciousness grows into what surrounds him as his environment. I think we can say as his climate also. We no longer talk here abstractly and in general of the human being having a consciousness of God within him. It's over here, the light within, of forming a unity within the surrounding world. Here, we learn to recognize in detail how this unity is constituted, how the human being is joined with the entire universe. We must not consider the human being in one earth life by itself. Instead, we have to focus on the cycle of metamorphosis. What at one time is a social system of rights conceived by the mind will become an order of nature at another later time. With the help of spiritual science, one can see how the thought-out political order of one age is connected with the atmospheric order of nature of another time. Okay, so we can study history, of course, and see where we got into the mess we're in at the moment, but of course we can also take up the question, so how do we need to live now so that the future will be different? It's not just saving CO2 or stopping using coal, or I don't know, in Holland they've started to forbid people to have too many cows because they give gas into the world. I won't go into detail on that, but all sorts of things that one can do outwardly, and I do think we need to take outer steps, but the point is we need to find our responsibility, realize our responsibility from the point of view of cultivating the soul, creating the soul again and again new. Every year, this cycle of the calendar of the soul, that we may unite with these forces of creation and re-enliven the world, balance again the climate, the atmosphere of this earth. And so, in the center of all this is, of course, the Michaelmas festival, which has to do so much with balance, with this middle realm, actually. It is also, we can see particularly in 1923, how important it was for Rudolf Steiner that this is the social festival. Just imagine, between the burning of the Goetheanum and the Christmas Foundation meeting, that he brings the Michaelmas festival in this context. Although he certainly knows how difficult it will be after 1925 with the Anthroposophical Society, he takes on this karma and gives us the Michaelmas festival as a point of growth, as a little drop of medicine that we can take up and heal the earth and heal social life. A festival which hasn't got to do with traditions, but a festival which is celebrated out of the spirit directly. That is what we learn, particularly in this lecture in Berlin. The festival directly out of the spirit. And I think we can say out of that, the Michaelmas festival can fructify also every festival, every week. It is the center of this path. Every week can then become a point of balance and a point when we remember we are the bridge between the spirit world and the earthly world. So I think to perhaps finish for today, we can imagine that the Michaelmas festival as the central point, the focal point of the calendar of the soul, shows us that Rudolf Steiner has given us a Michaelic gift with this path of the soul, this path of feeling self-recognition, a way to transform the three parts of our soul, the way we live in head and limbs and the rhythms of our soul, to then make good what may become. What from our hearts we are founding, what we from our heads direct out of will, and the point of this will is Michaelmas. So it was a Michaelmas gift of Rudolf Steiner, and I think we can say it is a Michaelic deed if we take this up and practice again and again. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Richard. And tonight we actually have audio for our online audience. So if you do have a question tonight, please let us know and we can ask you to unmute and ask your question. I do see a question already here in our live audience. So Carolyn, do you want to ask a question first?
Okay, this is quick. What is the GA number of the book that you were talking about tonight?
Chicago book,
Yeah,
199.
199?
Yes,
Thank you.
1920.
So Richard, somebody asked if you have a picture of the lemniscate of the weekly verses and their relationship to each other, and if you could show it on, and I could zoom in on a camera.
Thank you, that's a good question. We've sold all the books.
Oh, there's a poster. Do you want me to run and get that downstairs on the easel?
Oh, yeah, that'd be
Thank
great.
you,
Yes, we
Deborah.
have a picture of it. Oh, thank you. Yes, we have a picture downstairs. So that saves me drawing it again because they won't be very nice.
Okay,
So
yeah,
let me say the lemniscate, of course, will show us how these four movements, these four directions of the year play together. To find the verses that belong together, it's much easier to take the circle, because then we find this cross and how the cross moves within the year. You have to draw the lemniscate really big to be able to fit your 52 verses onto that.
Leon, do you want to ask a question?
Back to Carolyn's question, I wanted to, I'm pretty sure I can do this. I'm in a study group online with spiritual forms. That book is very, very difficult for all of us. But if you're interested in joining such a group, we meet online, as I say, this is a New Mexico group, and it's every Wednesday night, 8 o'clock.
So every Wednesday to New Mexico, that's,
And how would they find out about it?
From myself, I'll send her an email with all the information.
Okay. All right, so you want
So
to,
there we have, thank you very much, I've forgotten this completely, the picture of the lemniscate. Now, Karl Koenig got Carlo Pizza to draw this because he was afraid he wouldn't do it exactly as it needs to be. So there we have this lemniscate of the year, and we can imagine the central point is Michaelmas and Easter. Whereas at the top here would be winter, this is Christmas, the Christmas verse, and at the bottom here, the St. John's verse. So we have this outer movement, breathing out in the summer half year and breathing in the winter half year. But that means across 4 directions, because as you know from eurythmy, when we go past this point, we are in the winter half year, but we're going inside until Christmas. And after Christmas, we begin to go out towards Easter. And crossing over this crossing point at Easter, we go towards St. John's. That is, we're in the outside, but we're going out also in the first half of the summer half year. Whereas after St. John's, we are already going inside. So that is the secret, of course, of St. John's Festival, is after the summer solstice. And therefore, in this movement of looking towards Michaelmas, that's where we have these 4 directions that Kai König speaks of, 4 voices that sing together every week. And we can imagine that every week, every cross, like we see here, each of the 13 crosses is to be found here. It begins here with Easter and Michaelmas right close together in one point, and then grows outwards as the weeks go on. So you can find that there's a little square here. I find it, to find these verses for yourself, it's easy to have a circle, because then you have the cross and can find them quite easily. The lemniscate, as I say, you would need to use your whole wall to draw on them. Pin your verses to 52 times.
Can I just point out 2 other things about this
Yes,
lemniscate that
please.
are relevant or related? One is that one can map the human circulation of blood, oxygen to, the red to the blue, in and out,
Yes.
going up to the brain and back down to the heart and lung, going through this. And musically, one can look at the circle of fifths is really not a circle of fifths if you start going through the enharmonic scales, and they map on this lemniscate as well. There are the inner scales and the outer scales, and then you get to the mirrored planetary scales that you work with. So, which is a whole nother subject, but I just
Oh,
say,
yes.
this is all the same picture of the breathing.
Thank you. We're just publishing Kai König's work on music and music therapy, so I even understand what you're saying. As a non-musical person.
Richard, in that lecture that Rudolf Steiner gave in Berlin about Michaelmas, did he talk about ways to celebrate Michaelmas as a festival? I know it's been a big question in Waldorf schools.
Yeah.
With a lot of people not even using the word Michaelmas, and the whole question of the relationship of spirit, no connection to that, and basically calling it a festival of courage with the focus on the individual. And yet you're talking about something very social here. And I'm just looking maybe for something more expansive that might be guidance.
There are many indications in that lecture, but there are no recipes of how to do it. So I think there have been many attempts at this, and one of them is also to look at the 3 faces of the Archangel Michael. And that's also quite interesting because, of course, within the current of the soul, we have this transformation of thinking, feeling, and willing. And in the images Kai König has drawn, you will find also about cosmic wisdom, the connection of our thinking to cosmic wisdom, and That is one face of Saint Michael. So courage, yes, courage runs through everything. We need courage to leave behind our thoughts. We find out about that at latest wits, right? At the latest. Already at Easter will be here that we are dimly connected to the Spirit. Wow. You know, our thought goes into this dim sphere, and at Whitstone we're really told, you know, you can only feel now, no thinking. That's difficult. You really need courage. So to leave this Whitsun moment and approach Michaelmas, we already need the courage from the point of view of thinking, because we are leaving what we usually call thinking to actually approach cosmic thought. That is something very different. Has to do, of course, with the cosmic forces of creation. So, and secondly, we have, of course, this element of balance. Yes, it has to do with courage, of course. If you balance across a rope between, I don't know, the north rim and south rim of Grand Canyon, or wherever you like to balance, that needs courage. And without courage, you're going to fall down. That's no question. But this element of balance, as we've heard in these lectures also, is something quite of its own. And to take this up, for instance, in the Michaelmas festival, and ask, we can ask about biographies of our time or of history, where we find this element of inner balance, for instance. And it depends, of course, what community we're talking about. We're talking about schools community, we're talking about early childhood, we're talking about youngsters, we're talking about adults, anthroposophical branch, or what are we talking about? And but I think there we'll find all these leading images to find what will be suitable for the circumstances. The third face of Michael being pictured in the Middle Ages with the sword. And if you look around, you'll find at least two swords. I think there are three, but at least two. And you'll see that the sword has a completely new character here. The most wonderful picture of the sword is here, when we get towards Easter, 47. There we see the sword in this element of balance also. So it is actually not the question of fighting the dragon, in the sense of, the dragon is everywhere else, not in me, of course. That is the way we like to look at evil, Everybody else is evil, I'm not actually. That it has to do with recognition out of normal thinking. But when we really look at the need to fight the dragon, then of course it is the question how I manage to forge my will through Michaelmas, that it can be a healing element for the earth. So the sword is always over here, for instance, and three swords. Thank you. Yes, three swords. They're all three pointing to the earth. They're not like this. It's the human deeds which we hear of in just after Christmas, verse 41. So, striving to take form in human love and human deeds. So this will is striving to take form in human love and human deeds. It's also an element one can look at in biography, for instance, or telling each other of one's own experiences. So, I think it depends so much on the setting. Where are we? How do we celebrate that? How do we find images that are big enough that it doesn't get too trivial, We liked to play games with the younger children at Michaelmas, and balancing and forging with iron and things like that. Yeah. That takes courage to do, for a child especially, to put the iron in the fire and then hit it with a hammer. It's a wonderful experience. But on its own, it's not enough unless we really have, for instance, the picture of Saint Michael in some way. So I think that there are no recipes of how to do it, but how do we enable the individual, enable also the community to live with this higher image, also not only with earthly deeds, but also to reach to cosmic wisdom. Balance between.
There is one question from online.
Okay,
participants.
thank
Mary
you.
Louise.
Great, thank you. Yes, I have a question about, am I okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Not really.
I have a question about the relationship between Michael as archangel, Michael as time spirit, and the seasonal calendar.
You might add even calling him Saint Michael when he's in the hierarchy.
I didn't hear what you said. Was it in response to my question?
Say it again, Deborah, what you.
Oh, I was just adding to the naming of Michael as you mentioned, Archangel and the Time Spirit or Archai, but also a lot of people say Saint Michael, which is more earthly.
Yes, but Michael needs to be earthly also. We just have to realize it's through us. But how do we bring these images for children, for instance? And I think the legends of Saint Michael are a great help. You see a rhythmic performance of one of the Saint Michael legends, or the songs that we have, for instance, Saint Michael songs. I think are very good because they bring this element and bring in an image also this, how shall I say, this future aim of the human being to forge one's own spirit drives or spirit aims towards the future of the earth. But, you can't tell children that. You have to put it into pictures, and therefore the legends that we do have are of course very good, but there are also newer legends of the archangel, which are not quite so earthly. You just have to see. The Saint Michael legends are not really earthly. Saint George is the earthly representative of Saint Michael. The Saint Michael legends are all actually cosmic. But of course, we put them into earthly pictures, just like we do in the fairy tales.
So the archai, the time spirit, I'm sorry,
Go ahead.
the time spirit, Michael as archai, time spirit,
Yes,
he still functions as an archangel in the seasonal calendar, seasonal cycle of the year. So it's a both and situation where so it isn't that someone else has moved into that place.
because we are living in the age of Michael, because he's the time spirit, he's the spirit of our epoch, so to speak. Because of that, we need a Michaelmas festival. We need a festival to celebrate, to have a point in the year where we really concentrate on the time spirit.
Yeah.
Therefore, also not to live in the past, to look back to old traditions or whatever, but actually to create something new. And the Michaelmas Festival, that is what Rushai says in Berlin, to create something new and not to celebrate like the other festivals can connect quite easily to outer events, or historical events, but not really the Michaelmas Festival. To create this out of the spirit, that's what it's about. And then, because it is the time spirit, of course, to reinvent, so to speak, the other festivals too. Every week of the year, we reinvent according to the Michaelmas festival. This whole path of the calendar of the soul is a path, a Michaelic path. And therefore, each week we are actually transforming something in the sense of the Archangel Michael or the time spirit Michael. We are, and I think we can say that if we connect to the Anthroposophic Society, definitely we are Michaelic people. We need to discover our Michaelness and to therefore celebrate Christmas, or if you want to call it something else, okay? If you want to call Easter something else, okay. But how do we really celebrate what is meant by Easter in a Michaelic way? And that is in the same lecture, Rudolf Steiner also speaks about the connection between Easter and Michaelmas and says, in autumn, we reverse the experience of Easter. It is not death and resurrection, but resurrection before death. So, in the same sense, we can say to celebrate Easter is to celebrate it with a view towards Michaelmas. And so also the other festivals.
Thank you.
Great. Anyone else have any question? Deborah?
Well, I want to have the last word.
And so this is a conversation we do have sometimes, who has the last word?
All right, do you want to get up in front of
Well,
the
I
camera?
don't know if there's any other questions.
Anyone
Yeah, are
else
there
have
any
any other
online?
question? Oh, Diane, yeah.
Could you tell me what the time spirit is? Or what does a time spirit do? I don't know this idea.
Let's just say it is a spirit which takes on a whole period of history, thousands of years. So the whole epoch we're living in now, and particularly the time from Steiner names the date of 1879, when the Archangel Michael actually becomes the spirit of our time, and there we cross over into a new consciousness also. That is the significance, I think, also of anthroposophy, because it is working with the spirit of our time. And therefore, I think it is a help to use the name of Michael to, at least amongst us, that we know what we're talking about. For the teachers at the first Waldorf school, he didn't name that. He said for the spirit of our time, for the necessities of our epoch, and so on and so on, connecting to the hierarchies. He didn't name Michael there. Directly afterwards, when he gave almost the same content in Donna, he speaks only about Michael. So, what do we make of that, you know? Yeah, but it's a huge time span in which we are now, and so that's why this festival in autumn is actually so important, and because we are, so to speak, within the whole flow of time, the development of our times are bringing us now to this experience of death. That is where we're going. The earth is dying around us, right? Humanity with it, to a certain extent. And therefore we can say this festival of Michaelmas in autumn is a festival for the year, but also for our times, to realize where we stand. And that makes it so important that we go through this central point of the calendar of the soul with the consciousness, this is actually what we need exactly for this time we're living in. It belongs to our incarnation, if I may say it like that. If we're thinking about, you know, forging our spirit aims, then that has to do with the spirit of our time.
All right, thank you everyone so very much for coming tonight, and I am gonna definitely give Deborah the last word. I just wanna say that we have had an extraordinarily rich week here in Chicago at Rudolph Center Branch, and Many people have been coming to each of the lectures, and I know that there's been a lot of people coming online repeatedly. So I just really want to thank the Carl Koenig Institute and Richard and Deborah for coming to Chicago and sharing this incredible work of Carl Koenig's with us, as well as all of the incredible wisdom of your talks, Richard. And I just hope that everyone will go onto our website, www.rchicago.org, and contribute financially to support the branch as in our efforts and all of our work in bringing this to everyone here and online. So with that, I thank you all, and I'm going to turn it over to Deborah, and she's going to have the last word. So.
Thank you, Mary, and yeah, wow, what a time we've had, the beginning of these exhibitions. So thank you all for bringing it about with us. I think we could feel that something built up over this time, and it has to do very much with what Richard is bringing and how everyone is receiving. So yeah, I want to say thank you, and also especially thank you to all the people who are responsible for the branch here in Chicago for all the work they have put into this. And yes, do support their efforts, because it does cost money for us to bring the exhibition from Europe and all of those things. What I also wanted to say, particularly for the people who are participating online, is that the people who come here, we have a couple of book tables downstairs with all of the books that the Carl Koenig Institute, that Richard has published through the Carl Koenig Institute, Carl Koenig's newly edited written works. And so they sold out quickly, so I can't show you them, but there are 2 books that have to do with the calendar of the soul. You can look on the website of the Institute. One is called An Inner Journey Through the Year, and that has the 52 pictures, the weekly pictures, and an introduction. And another is called The Calendar of the Soul, a Commentary, and that is more contributions about the calendar of the soul. And it has the 13 cross drawings. So if people are interested in having these pictures together, the Carl Koenig Institute does print the sets of all of these cards together, and you can purchase them if you're somewhere online by just sending an email to office@Carl Koenig Institute, and I can send them to you from the North American office. So I just wanted to say that, and also to mention that these, I think, really beautiful and living translations that Richard has made through this talk series of 52 weeks are now published in a book. So if you're interested in Richard's translations, you can also get that through the Carl Koenig Institute, as well as everything else that we offer. So I wanted to particularly make that possibility available to those of you who have participated in, I'm going to say, this Michaelmas, not quite Michaelmas festival that we've had here together in Chicago. So again, big heartfelt thanks and heartland to all of you, and to you, Richard.
And where are you going next, Deborah? Tell us a little bit what's the pathway of this exhibit through North America?
So tomorrow morning, we will have packed up the exhibition and the books and everything else, and be heading for Campbell, Minnesota, which is really also in the heartland. It's I think about 2 hours, a bit northwest of Minneapolis. So we have a long day's drive ahead of us, and we'll be there, and Richard will again give 5 lectures through Michaelmas for the community at Campbell, Minnesota, which is an agricultural and life-sharing community. And then there are actually 14 exhibitions. I'll just give the highlights, but the information is on the website of the Carl Koenig Institute. In between, Richard goes back to Berlin and home and work, and I go back to Pennsylvania and the office there. The next exhibitions will be in Columbia County in upstate New York, the end of October and the beginning of November. And then we go to Spring Valley in March, and we'll be there for 2 different events. And then the next place will be Los Angeles, and then we go up to Sacramento Fair Oaks area, and then Camp Hill, California, which is near Santa Cruz. And then we drive up the coast to Vancouver Island, where the Camp Hill community there will be hosting the exhibition. And then back home again. And the last exhibitions will be at Camp Hill Soul Pain in Pennsylvania. And then in the Boston area, that's co-sponsored by the Christian community and the Greater Boston branch. And then it will end in New York City with the New York City branch. So those are all the trips that are planned, with a few smaller stops in between. That like we'll be in Portland where Richard will give a talk for one night when we're en route. So a lot happening in the next couple of years. And I will add that in November, the second weekend of November, the 8th to the 10th, 2024, we will be holding a Casper Hauser Festival in Pennsylvania, in the Camp Hill area of Pennsylvania. So we have to talk about that in the car tomorrow.
Yeah. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. All right. All right, thank you.
Thank you so much.
The brochure that's in here and in the journey through the year, that's on the table downstairs. If you want to take one of those, gives you a little bit of information about the books and the exhibition.
And has the numbers date.
Souvenir.
When we are,
Organize this?
Do you want to leave the drawings up for a little bit for people to go around? on
Yeah,
that
sure.
side?
Yeah, we said we leave them for half an hour. And then-
Yeah, we won't take them down. Yeah. So we'll start taking them down at
Yeah, I
a
agree
little
with
bit before 9:30. Anyone who's still around and can help. And if everybody's leaving before, then we'll take them down.